Good morning and welcome to today's workshop, Prosumer Data Exchanges to enable seamless flexibility integration into TSO, DSO markets. I'm Michael Villa, I'm the Executive Director of Smart 10, Smart Energy Europe. And before introducing you briefly the topic and content and the objective of this webinar, please allow me to present briefly Smart 10, which is co-organizing today's workshop together with the European Commission. So in the next slide, you can see the logos of the members of Smart 10, our European business organization, which is integrating the companies that are enabling all consumers to become active, to become flexible, to be integrated in the power system. And in order to allow this move from a passive to an active engagement of consumers with the energy system, data is key. We need to have data to be shared, to be access to data, both from market players, both from consumers and also system operators. The simple access to this data is not enough. We need to have data that is interoperable within a common European data space. And this is indeed the objective of today's workshop, in view of the digitalization in energy action plan that the European Commission is going to put on the table in a few months. So this is why today we are going to have a pretty comprehensive discussions, and indeed in the next slide, when I would like to provide you with an overview of the agenda of today. We are going to have different perspectives outlined. Well, first of all, we are going to start with Tag O'Brien, the deputy head of the competent unit from the European Commission, which is shaping this digitalization in energy action plan. Then we are going to have a presentation from Laurent Smith, head of utilities and European development for Decibel, who is also the chair of Smart 10 Digital Agenda Committee, who is going to present the opinion and the perspective of Smart 10. And then we have going to be a panel debate with market participants, market players, and in particular, we are going to have a representative from Cybergrid and Grid Singularity. And then we're going also to have system operators, both from DSOs and the TSO side, and indeed we are going to have Elia and Giod represented, and also NRAs, represented in this case by CRs. And then a conclusion once again, by the Commission, in this case, is represented by Mark. Before kickstarting the discussion, let me present some housekeeping rules for today's webinar. We would like that to be interactive. So in the next slide, you have the information that indeed this workshop is going to be recorded. The slides indeed will be posted on the European Commission webpage. Participants are going also to receive a follow-up emails. We received more than 300 registrations, so indeed we are very happy of the interest of these webinars. And then we would like that to be interactive, so participants can post questions through the question button located in the lower right corner of the screen, and the moderator will introduce questions to panelists in the dedicated sessions. I don't want to take further time, and I'm really happy to welcome the first and give the floor to the first speaker, Tag O'Brien from the European Commission. So Tag, you have the floor. Tag, you are muted. Tag, you are muted.
Yeah, there we go. Excuse me.
Voila.
2 years into this and we still make these mistakes, huh? So first of all, thanks, Michael, for the words of introduction, and thank you to Smart 10 for hosting this workshop. I think we greatly appreciate it, and I'll come back to why more in particular later. I also want to say special thanks, of course, to Marianne Malafossa, who has been involved in setting this up, and who I worked with previously and also greatly appreciate always. Today, I think we really do have a great lineup of speakers and a really interesting set of questions to answer. But it always comes down to one major point, which is that we're trying to make the link between the digital and the green transitions real for energy consumers. Now, when you're working in DG Ener and working on the energy transition for long enough, you can sometimes feel like Bertolt Brecht in the Lösung, when you want to say, would it not be simpler for the network operators to simply dissolve their users and to choose another one, a more rational or more flexible energy user to support the system? Well, look, without stretching these comparisons so far, I think we actually rather have to change the system to suit consumers, to make them enable to benefit from new and innovative companies, offering them ways to save money, offering them the ways to have better services as we manage the energy transition. Now, for this to happen, not only do companies need to have data, but it needs to be consistent and usable. And that's the thread that runs through everything that we're going to be talking about today, because this is the data that links all the different parts of the value chain. And that's what we're looking at in terms of having a European data space. So today's meeting is in the context of the preparation of the Digitalisation of Energy Action Plan. This was set out in the Commission's work programme for 2022, when we said that we will, I'm quoting now, is propose an action plan for an accelerated digital transformation of the sector, which is needed to ensure the shift towards renewables, connected mobility, smart buildings, and a more integrated energy system with consumers at its core. Now, inside DG Ener, the preparation of this action plan, being led by Mark and Ener B5, is a joint effort with input from colleagues from all different parts of the DG. And that's actually why I'm opening the event today, but Mark will close it from the Innovation Unit. But it's not just a matter of something for the Commission. The input of stakeholders is absolutely critical for the success of this initiative. So here, I think I should take a moment just to thank all of you who responded to our public consultation. We're going through those responses now and integrating and adapting our ideas as a result. Now, together with the series of workshops that are happening now in which this forms a part of, this input from stakeholders will be reflected in the final action plan. And that's now planned for September. But it's clear, and this will be clear from the consultation questions and from your responses, I think, as well. One of the key points to be included is a new structure to define principles and ensure consistency across different data sharing priorities and initiatives in the energy sector. There are a multiplicity of areas in where we're working. And actually, I want to make a point here that this goes beyond simply network operators. Why is that? Because as well as looking at grids, we have to look at facilitating smart buildings. We have to look at smart appliances. We have to look at electric vehicles. Now, at the same time, we're planning to adopt the Implementing Act on the interoperability of metering and consumption data. This is being prepared under the Smart Grids Task Force currently, and their draft recommendation is almost final. Now, of course, we're going to have to discuss this inside the Commission and with the Member States before the final act is adopted. But we are confident that the deep involvement that we've had of stakeholders through the Smart Grids Task Force will mean that the advice we receive can be reflected in the final act. Now, maybe these kind of internal procedures don't interest people, and actually it's time for us in the Commission to listen, as I said, to get the stakeholder perspective and to begin to integrate it into our plans, and for everybody else here to have their chance to contribute. So finally, thank you, SmartN. Thank you to all the speakers who've agreed to participate. Thank you to all the panelists. And I really look forward to interesting discussions. Thank you. Back to Michael.
Thanks a lot, Tag. We really appreciate indeed this cooperation with the European Commission on this extremely important action plan. And now I'm going to give the floor to Laurent, who is going to present indeed the perspective of SmartN, and then is going to guide us in the panel with market players, system operators, and NRA. Laurent, you have the floor.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Tag, for this introduction. I hope you hear me well. And I'm going to present now basically the result of the work which we did through Smarten in the last 12 months as part of a new digital committee, which we try to anticipate basically the thinking related to how to further digitize the energy system to particularly bring prosumer at the center of this future energy system. So if we move to the next slide, basically what we really want to achieve through, I think that next step is the scaling of renewable at the maximum possible capacity of grids, and in the same time enabling decentralized generation while keeping the system efficient. So for Smarten, what is very important is the system efficiency. So in a nutshell, making sure this transition is managed and ensure at minimum cost to the citizen, and maximizing the socioeconomic welfare, making good use of flexibility of prosumers. If we move to the next slide, of course, that means that data is a common layer which is to be organized around that, and we see that into this environment, everyone expects a very significant growth of renewables, so more or less a time 4 as what we've been observing today, which means more volatility. The volatility is here to stay, and new business model to develop out of this volatility, and particularly a business model related to flexibility, which the latest IEA report highlights to be multiplied by 4 as well. So basically new revenue opportunities for prosumers or aggregator managing prosumer portfolios. So in this context, the data access in particular is key. So if we could move to the next slide, please. So what we try to do when we thought about this new approach is really try to step back and think basically from the prosumer's perspective, and trying to listen to prosumer. What are prosumer expecting? And for sure, prosumer are basically a particular agent into the system, so they are not as specialist as what are energy system managers. And so what is at stake for them is really being able to best choose their tariff, to play a role into the climate change mitigation through communities, engaging in a different way with their peers, but also making better use of what comes not only through the smart meter, but through the all the sensors and the distributed energy resource, which are progressively spreading through the house, building heat pumps, smart chargers, and in order to basically also be able to become more resilient. So we were talking about resilience in terms of extreme weather conditions, but more and more, I think the recent sad news are also further highlighting the need to become resilient from a geopolitical perspective. So this is, I think, what we think are the key drivers for a prosumer to become active and engaged into this new flexibility play. So if we move to the next slide. So here, basically what is really new as compared to what was probably into the prosumer space 5 years ago is the acceleration of the amount of controllable loads which we see spreading throughout our prosumer environment. So, and not only into, I would say, B2B environment, but also in particular for B2C environment, where we see a new device appearing, smart charging, potentially V2X, as well as more and more distributed generation, solar photovoltaics, and as well as home storage as a natural way to self-optimize into the varying energy tariffs. So here the question is, how, I think, can we create a layer across all these devices which allows a smooth and seamless interaction from prosumer back into the energy system? If we move to the next slide, please. So here the key use case which we see and which we think are important and which we've tried to highlight in our paper is really to be able to provide better metrics to data regarding their energy performance and carbon footprint. So basically requiring to bridge these data feeds across the system, being able to make better use of submetering information, near real-time measurement in particular, so going beyond what we traditionally do with the smart metering deployment, while in the same time, of course, maintaining the right level of cybersecurity and interoperability for data access, making sure the consumer is at the center of selecting who is basically he or she is sharing the data with, and making sure we can easily integrate data sets. The example of the guarantees of origin, I think, is a very good one, as well as basically really seamlessly track progress across measurements ex ante, ex post throughout the system. So if we move to, so this really goes far into preparing and baselining, forecasting down to settlements. So if we go to the next slide. So the must-have which we have identified for system efficiency is really the need to go beyond purely the smart metering environment and look inside the building, inside the house, down to a submetering environment. Basically ensuring a trusted data exchange between the prosumer and the system, and basically ensuring the right level of real-time data sharing, depending on the type of services which are offered in terms of flexibility to the system, and setting up basically new energy data space which are sufficiently interoperable and which protect the consumer from a cybersecurity point of view. So these are really the key pillars which we have been highlighting through our paper, and which we would be interested to hear from through the next discussion. If we move to the next slide, please. What a very interesting element as well about this digital strategy is that it is actually touching a lot of elements of legislation and directives. And we have been trying to map basically what are the implications of this digital discussion. And what we can see on that slide, it really goes across a series of legislation and regulation. And we've been trying at SmartN to be as consistent as possible to really advocate basically for consistent positions across all these coming directives, in particular the new Building Energy Performance Directive, Renewable Energy Directive, and of course the new, the existing implementing acts, whether the implementing act for interoperability or for the flexibility network code. So here, I think what we really advocate and ask for is as much as possible to keep all these approach when it comes to digital consistent, so that we can best benefit from it from a prosumer point of view. If we move to the next slide, please. So one question which is obviously important is what are the various layers and what is the architecture which we see emerging from the prosumer into the grid operator. And here there are basically obvious entities which have been created for market operation, being flexibility service provider or balancing responsible party. So what we've been trying to distinguish into our paper is really two levels of interoperability, which we think is very crucial and critical. Is one between the network operator, TSOs, DSOs, and the market operators. And the second layer, which is sometimes a bit less discussed and I would say less central, is between the owners of these DR and prosumers and these actors, flexibility service provider and balancing responsible party, so that there is a fluid interaction between consumer, prosumer in deciding which aggregating entity to work with, depending on the type of services being offered, and as much as possible ensuring data portability and data access across these various users, potentially down to having different entities offering flexibility services to the same prosumer. So what we feel is what is particularly important in terms of interoperability is the data portability layer at the prosumer level back to the aggregation entities. If we move to the next slide, please. So that's in a nutshell what we've been summarizing into our report. We hope that you will have a look at it, and we would of course welcome any feedback from any players on further engaging onto this topic and working together through SmartEnd and with other entities into further digitalizing this environment. Thank you. So maybe what we now would need to move to the next discussion phase. Okay, so I'm very happy to be the moderator of the next discussion. I think we have a very interesting panel, as what was introduced by Michael, showing different sides of the industry. So I will maybe let everyone introduce briefly himself and or herself, and then I'll go with a series of questions. So maybe if you can quickly go through you and introduce from what perspective you are engaging into these debates. Anna, you want to start?
Thank you. Anna Terbovic from Great Singularity, also co-founder of Energy Web Foundation. Like our colleagues at SmartEnd, we support the individual and the environment to be at the center of the market and to lower the market barriers for the individual to actively participate and trade through local energy markets, which takes the form of energy communities in the European Union.
Thank you. Michel?
Yeah, so I'm Michiel Beek. So I work as an implementation manager within the customers and the consumer centricity department within ELIA. So ELIA is part of the ELIA group, which unifies the Belgian TSO and one of the German TSOs from Sicherts into one group.
Thank you. Christoph?
Good morning, I'm Christoph Kutschi from Cybergrid. Cybergrid is a solution provider for intermediate platforms and aggregation solutions. So we will bring in the point of view of the engineer in the field dealing with daily business of providing flexibility.
Thank you. Georg?
Hi, Georg Hartmann from, here we go. Georg Hartmann from Austrian Energy Association. Sorry, this is supposed to be.
I'm sorry, Georg, we don't hear you very well, I think.
Yeah, because
so maybe we can switch to Veli in the meantime. Georg, maybe if you can check your mic or connection.
Yes, okay. Hi, Veli-Pekka Sajo. I'm the chair of the distribution system working group within the Council of European Energy Regulators, and I'm working as a Deputy Director General of the Finnish Energy Authorities.
Okay.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. So basically, I would like to first have a first round of a question to maybe set the scene, and starting with Anna. So Anna, what's your approach in setting up this open ecosystem and favoring prosumer participation? Any specific points which you want to make in terms of facilitating the data exchange?
Thank you, Laurent. We feel, like everyone at SmartEnd, that policy should be absolutely technology agnostic, but at the same time ensure that barriers to market access are removed, that rules are transparent and supportive of interoperability of standards and solutions. Most poignantly, while we all wish to ensure security and privacy of data, we need to be able to identify different layers of technology infrastructure in a logical manner and enable sharing, analysis, and use of data streams for the benefit of everyone participating in the market. Interoperability, from our perspective, is the key precondition for progress, and open source reference architecture is its founding pillar. Therefore, and this includes our previous discussions with the Commission and other policymakers, we feel that it is paramount that EU has a standardized digital and decentralized registry for energy assets. There is technology available today. There are open source toolkits. There is a very useful blockchain implementation as well. Therefore, if we had this decentralized energy asset registry at the EU level, it would both protect data and ensure that it's used in a way that promotes competition and innovation in this field. Secondly, and this is something I have often said openly, we really feel that in this particular area, the EU bodies happen to be more progressive than the member state implementation. And this is the area of energy communities, where the directives, the relevant directives in the clean energy package really open the road to progressive implementation, liberalization to the benefit of the individual. The actual interpretation at member state level has been more narrow. Many still have not developed legislation in this area. Very few actually allow peer-to-peer trading and focus on self-consumption schemes, which could sometimes be counter-effective if we wish to ensure also grid resilience and response through flexibility that DSOs through price signals could invoke. And more importantly, in the future, we really should consider also trading between communities and not just within communities to enable this bottom-up market. I will stop here because I know some of you have actual examples, and Elia specifically, I know has been working, especially in this area of a decentralized energy assets registry with the Energy Web Foundation. Maybe one more point to add, which is that we're seeing too many EU projects supporting closed source solutions. And we feel that it would be good that any future projects need a justification of why one should support with public funding a solution that is not open source and interoperable, where there is another company developing one that is. So just to support the progress. And the other point related to projects is to consider that energy efficiency really should not be the sometimes the main KPI. We should also look at the use of renewable resources and use of resources in general, and how we reach other goals of decarbonization and economic and social welfare, which was also underscored by Laurent. So I'll stop here and engage in further discussion later. Thank you.
So thank you, Anna. So maybe let's move to Elia and Michel. So maybe in complement to the question of Anna, and I would like to come back on one of the points which we're making in our Smart N paper about data transparency and data access to essential information being network constraints or greenhouse gas emissions and so on. So what's your view and approach in Elia regarding these developments?
Yeah, indeed. So if you go to the Elia website, we had the data already available for a long time, but it was a bit widely dispersed. So you had to be a very good researcher to find all the necessary data. So that's also why we have introduced our Elia Open Data Portal, where we indeed make these available, these data sets available to market parties, but also to academics, journalists, that they can easily use it in one place, and it's all in the same place. And we have foreseen different ways to make available this data. So you can export there, you can do the visualizations, and so that's very useful, I think, for academics and for journalists to really map the data sets. But also we have APIs available. If you want to start developing services, you cannot work with an export, and an API is there more suitable. But also not only market parts, but also upcoming energy service providers. If you want to give indeed the consumer some idea if he's consuming green, it's not always a market party that should do it. You can just be an energy service provider that offers that to your service to your clients. On the other hand, we have introduced our own, let's call it Epic portal for our own clients, and indeed one of those functionalities is indeed to provide them access to their own data, because indeed we have clients connected directly to our high voltage grid, and indeed they could already do it, but it was a bit more looking into one of the tools that area offers, and now with Epic we have streamlined that process, and now we are further expanding it with some more features where indeed you can compare two data sets and put them together. For instance, your consumption versus the imbalance price to see when you are consuming. But indeed, you can also put there, like Anna said, when is the most renewable energy being produced, so that you can see, okay, how that gives you a bit of a correlation how green you are. And yeah, that's a bit, I think, mainly it. That is also why indeed we developed an exchange of energy block concept, and that would further indeed demonstrate or would help what Anna called indeed those peer-to-peer exchanges. That's a bit more general way of approaching a peer-to-peer exchange, not only for energy communities, but really also assets behind the meter that can indeed that you can go on, that you really can have different contracts for your electric vehicle, that you don't have a that you can create tailored services, that you don't have a one size fits all, but you currently have at your head meter. I think if you take the analogy with sports channels, you typically take a sports channel, but for mostly you're interested in just one or two sports. I think in the energy sector, we should be able to say, well, look, I want to have a smart charging service that makes, I want to charge green, somebody wants to charge cheap, that should be possible. They can have different service providers, that should be perfectly be okay.
Thank you. So very interesting approach with enabling and facilitating a multiple service provider behind the meter. So maybe switching to the DSO side, and hoping the connection is back now with Georg. What's your view and approach on the DSO environment?
I hope that you can hear me still. But well, DSOs have been. No, sorry, I'm having technical issues here. Sorry.
Okay, so sorry for that. So maybe we are going to escape the voice of the DSO today, unfortunately. So maybe I will switch back then to Christoph and to the practitioner of making use of grid data and aggregation and so on. So Christoph, what's your view into this debate, and how do you support interoperable solution, maybe through project like Interconnect? And do you think we need the same APIs for different countries in Europe, or what's your approach? How to further harmonize and align these approaches?
Yeah, thank you for these questions. Indeed, you're hitting the hot points. So it's first of all, providing flexibility by prosumers is in the current market framework is a very complex task. And so the aim of Cybergrid as a provider of intermediary platforms and aggregation platforms is to simplify this complexity for the prosumer. So, and what do we have to communicate if we want to provide flexibility services? We need to communicate with the TSO, with the DSO, with the BRP at least, and maybe with the market operator. So this, and that's overwhelming for a final prosumer, for a prosumer or somebody which is just want to charge his EV with at least cost or with green electricity. So they don't want to bother with all these interoperability challenges. So that's what an intermediary platform can do for them. And by the same way, by collecting a lot of customers and aggregating prosumers, we reached a critical mass that is needed to be able to make a business case, because interoperability itself, the more standardized, the better, of course, but each data that is stored somewhere and exchanged somewhere is increasing the costs, and these costs must be weighted out by revenues. So and by reaching a critical mass, which is somewhere in the range of maybe 5 to 10 megawatts, depending on the market, yeah, that's how we can help prosumers. And of course, if already going to your second question, should we have the same technology solutions or interoperability between different European countries? Yes, definitely, because this will, in the midterm, decrease the costs of this to provide flexibility services. So definitely, yes. And finally, you asked for the interconnect project, which is a very high ambitious project. In this project, we are focusing, or as Cybergrid in particular, we are focusing on two aspects. One is to enable interoperability with DSO markets for flexibility, and the second one is the bigger goal to create an ontology data model for energy services based on Seraph, and this will also we are in the range of about 60 to 70 Seraphized services that will be discussed amongst all the partners in the project, and this should be used to extend the standard, and this will be reported to ETSI. So definitely, I agree that the solutions that are provided in funded projects should go into publicly available standards, and that's what we aim for in Interconnect. Also.
Yeah, thanks for this feedback, and I must say the Smart End position paper goes very clearly onto further harmonization of interfaces between grid operators. So, of course, between TSOs is a starting point, but also between TSOs and DSOs, we see more flexibility markets being introduced locally. So here, further aligning APIs and data formats into a uniform data space is absolutely crucial to reduce the cost and ease the participation of European prosumer into these markets. So this is a very important point. So maybe switching to the regulators now, and to Veli, and what's your view, and how can regulators support access to data and enable and lower the cost of this data access?
Yes, thank you, Laurent. Very, very demanding question to start with, but I will try to do my best. So first of all, of course, as a regulators, we need to ensure that the fair data access is to every stakeholder. That's of course some key element which we work on it, and the challenge is of course that we have to protect the consumer data and safeguarding equal access to all the stakeholders as well. So, for example, we need to make sure that when new service providers have access to customer database, that's done safely, of course. But that's something that we've been working for a while now, and of course we need to see like if there are any more barriers. For example, we discussed the platforms here already, and to have a broader data access and sharing that allows consumers easily to take part in these new business models and schemes and platforms as well. To do that, of course, in my opinion, we need to simplify market rules as well. So the small scale demand flexibility could participate easily to different platforms, for example. And of course, since we have incumbents in the markets already, so we have to make sure that we have some rules to how they can engage the markets while we have newcomers providing services to consumers and DSOs, for example. And with that, I would like to say that CR has now a new strategy in which we have enhanced dynamic regulation issues, and with that we have worked on sandboxes. And I know we've been piloting for many years and trials and all that, but in our view, it should be that we have a more formal way of doing sandboxes and learning how to simplify regulations, and of course to give the innovators possibilities to see how different things works and which don't work, of course. So this would help us to understand more betterly how the regulation should be perhaps permanently changed, or perhaps there could be some small changes in that sense. And just to mention that we are about to publish our new paper on sandboxes, so that is, you will see our first views, and we will continue work on the dynamic regulation issues and publish further paper on that as well this year. Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe we will now switch to the second part of the discussion, which is related to barrier of data access, and I see a few questions about what we mean exactly by data portability. How can we use basically connectivity with the cloud and maybe simplify some of these layers of data integration rather than doing it in the field, in the prosumer environment, which is always complex and difficult, maybe bridging it to the cloud-to-cloud APIs connections. And I think that's if you look at the architecture which we saw which we showed in our paper, this is a bit of the idea of bringing this interoperability layer between the prosumer and the flexibility service provider. So maybe I will go to the panelists, Anna and Christoph, starting from your side. Where do you feel are the most critical barriers today in terms of data sharing and enabling this new environment?
The barriers are in lack of clarity, in my opinion, as to how new, and I found a question of what is a DSO and a TSO very interesting, because it's actually not a basic question anymore, because the roles are shifting in a way that it's difficult to actually answer fully, how as they evolve. At the same time, the role of an individual is also changing. We sometimes have discussions about the term end user, where I usually argue that the individual is not the end user, but sometimes the first actor in the market, whether they're presuming or using their consumption load as a flexibility resource, and that we just need to look at the market differently. And because the market is shifting, and there's recognition that it should shift, it's going in the right direction, but the interpretation of how these different roles play out in practice is still too unclear. Therefore, we have, as noted, many sandboxes, we have projects, but they don't often go very far. Sometimes they don't go very far because there is even debates about who should be able to communicate with a smart meter. Sometimes they don't go very far because people are worried what happens if you give too much liberty to the individual, even though you want to do that. So mainstreaming these regulatory sandboxes is really important because it's been a number of years. And ensuring that there is clarity, for example, who is then responsible for balance reporting, who does what, and we are in discussions with the smartest people in this area. We have the regulators here. We also have the Florence School of Regulation, and it's also, of course, a matter of politics as well, because what should be at the EU level, what should be at the member state level, what should be at the local level. And then, entangled with that, we have the basic lack of clarity of how one can even install a solar panel and how complicated that still remains in Europe, despite our wish and support and subsidies that went in. So I would put a lack of clarity of interpretation as the main issue. Technically, we're there. So we have done different demonstration studies, simulation studies, even using real-time data that this works in a way that shows very clear benefits, not just for a person's energy bill, but for their self-sufficiency, which is another important metric, not just self-consumption. And I'm talking about a community and not just the person and sharing. So I would say that our main message is that the technology is there. We need the regulation to be more clear, faster.
Thank you, Anna. Christoph.
Yeah, I fully support what Anna said. On top of that, in general, the electricity market itself is a very complex system, and the roles are not well understood by final consumers at all. So it's a challenge to even explain the difference between a DSO and a TSO to a final consumer, for instance. But also in the practical field, we have people working in utilities for 20 years, and they get lost with all these new roles and increasing complexity. And for instance, there's a lot of confusion about what to do exactly with energy communities and what are they allowed to do and what's the impact on the balance responsible party, etc. So that's and the complexity is still increasing. On top of that, we of course need to take care of data privacy, and we need to take care of security, which are clear cost drivers. We cannot avoid to talk about security, of course, but we need to be aware that this is a cost driver. And in particular, well, this will kill a lot of business cases where we cannot guarantee a secure communication with some prosumers or at reasonable costs. So this is where we really need to simplify and streamline the different national solutions. That's at the moment one of the main challenges that I see. So complexity of the system is increasing and will continue to increase. And a lot of people, even professionals, get lost with the complexity. And second one is that we need to find a trade-off between interoperability and privacy and security.
Thank you. So very clear, very big call for simplification of regulation. And unfortunately, we are not going necessarily into that direction with the flexibility markets discussion and these layering of local markets and so on. But I think it's interesting to have this point clearly made. So it looks like more a regulatory challenge than a technical challenge. So maybe I will switch now to Michel and Georg if the communication works. So Michel, what's your view from your TSO side? And particularly, I'm interested to hear from you whether you're trying to align your APIs interface with your other colleague TSOs, and so that it's getting easier for aggregators and flexibility service provider to move from one market to another one, and also whether you have any idea on how we could simplify this regulation and make it easy for prosumer to connect.
Yeah, very good question. So indeed, we have therefore working groups at European level, at NSOA level, where indeed the TSOs are sitting together. We also have, I think, but that's more for Georg. That is also the same collaboration on TSO level, which is good. And of course, you have there the current European projects, Mari and Picasso, that indeed have the intention to indeed create a European market for a European flexibility market. So that are indeed drivers for getting standardization. And so if you sit together in a room, there is more likely outcome that you eventually have the same APIs and that you agree on formats than if you just if each country is doing something on their own. It makes more complicated, and indeed you have also countries like Germany that have multiple TSOs. So there it's also a lot interesting that it's the same APIs there. So I think there, and also since we at ELIA Group are in the group, so we have our German colleagues. So indeed, we try to streamline as much as possible between the both organizations to come indeed to that group vision. But I think it's also important to notice that you have not only what we call the explicit balancing markets, where there is a lot of flexibility indeed sold to us as flexibility requesting party, but I think there's also a lot of flexibility markets, but more, let's call it the implicit flexibility markets, where consumers are triggered to adapt their behavior to use the flexibility in a sense that we like it as a system operator, but that not necessarily participate to our products. I think if you do smart charging, if you would foresee a price signal, now it's sunny outside, now it's the best moment to start charging your car. You will see that probably the price at the moment is a bit lower than it's in the evening. That are also implicit demand response that would also help the system. And for that, I think there is not only access to APIs from system operators. Indeed, we need to put available the necessary information, and it's suddenly now there's an excess of energy in the system. Now it's a good time to consume, but also service providers should have the ability to indeed steer the necessary assets of the consumers to participate into those implicit markets that are not really markets, really organized by the system operators. And it's more like a market. Okay, it's a side market. It's of course somewhere linked to the actual balancing market, but not active part of it. So I think that's also very important to keep those things in mind.
Thank you. So good to hear that there are discussion to further harmonize API. By the way, in the Smart End position paper, we recommend to harmonize around the 62351, which is widely used into Picasso, Mari, and balancing markets. So why not simply rather than reinventing a new API for any new markets in Europe, in TSO or DSO, simply work together into that API for any new markets. So that's the suggestion which we have in Smart and as part of this paper. So maybe I will try another time with Georg if the communication work. Georg, what's your approach on the DSO side? And one element which I would be interested to hear from you is related to submetering and how you see submetering developing further into the interoperability space and so on. So Georg, hopefully it will work.
Yeah, okay. At least I've muted myself now, so please wave your hand if you want to say something to me. So submetering is always a very controversial topic, because I think when people say submetering, then a lot of people on the grid operator side, TSO and DSO, probably don't have an imagination about what this can mean. What is a submeter and what can you do with it? What do you use it for? So I think it would help if we would get to a more focused discussion and say, well, we are talking about this or that asset. This asset has this and that responsibility. We need to get to a common language on, what do you want to do with a submeter? Are we talking about the interface of a flexible asset against the aggregator, right? And I think we should be a bit more focused on especially that submetering topic. And then we heard it before today, interoperability is key to get to scale with our solutions, and also to be able to use the same solution, not just in one member state, but also in another. And if you look at Article 20 of the Internal Electricity Market Directive, it says that non-validated near real-time data must be made available through a standardized interface directly on the meter or remotely, which led to the situation that you don't really know which standardized or which a standardized interface follows and how this standard is being configured. That's key. We need to get to a common language here. We need to get to a reference model of what are we actually talking about. And especially for the submeter topic, I think we need to be specific and focused on what smart meter and what asset we are talking about. Because everybody has his justified concerns, and they can only be addressed if we get to, if we talk about things in a common language.
Yeah, thank you, Georg, and a very clear response on the importance of interoperability and submetering, and the need to work more together on these data. Maybe switching back to the regulators and Veli, do you have any specific element to respond to these comments? And I see, for instance, also a question on when do you plan to produce your report on your first sandboxes, in continuation of your previous comment?
Okay, yeah, perhaps I answer that first. So it was approved this week, and it will be done some final linguistical checks, and it will be, I would say, in a week or two it will be published. So very soon, yeah. I have to say I support most of the discussion we have had on this subject as well. So I do agree that our standards are getting very old. They were written a couple of decades ago, two decades ago, something like that. So that there's clear need to work on the APs and standards in that sense, of course, to make sure the interoperability will be enhanced. And on the perhaps we haven't touched upon submetering in the CER very much, but of course that's a key element as well to see whether that will enhance the consumers' possibilities to participate as well.
Yeah, so maybe just to continue and on this question on submetering, we have inside Smarten a lot of discussion around particularly the use of baseline and enabling flexibility in the residential space. And we definitely see submetering as a very important element, basically to be able to better distinguish the flexibility being provided, particularly by smart chargers or heat pumps behind the meter, where a single basically smart meter does not provide sometimes accurate enough information, because combining a lot of DR flexibility information. So maybe to continue on that. So the more going to the policy measures. Do you have, maybe going to Anna, do you have any specific views on how we could ensure that every new decentralized assets are connecting and communicating with the system? Should we maybe enable them through the cloud first and into IoT environment, and then basically connect them through the cloud with the other service provider? Or do you have any specific ideas on how to ensure such connectivity in the future?
Laurent, as you're aware, I believe in a decentralized architecture.
Yeah.
And not putting all data in one silos, because that is, exposing data to unnecessary vulnerability. We now have a technical solution to avoid that, where everybody could essentially keep their data and share what is needed. Meaning that, it is not you as a person communicating, but the battery from your car or your solar panel or your pump or whatever your energy asset is with a different solution. Most of these solutions, and this is something I wanted to emphasize, do not actually need the very personal private data. They do not need to know the name of a person. Usually not even an address. Sometimes they do need geolocation depending on what they do, but usually not even that. When you have a decentralized energy identity and a registry that standardizes these assets, then you're able to communicate. And obviously, all of these IoT tools, they're different, but if an identity is standardized, then you can talk to these different solutions. And I'm not talking theoretically here. This solution is being implemented in Australia, which happens to be most advanced for a range of reasons in pushing for a renewable support architecture. In Europe now, as we talk about this registry, there is really no need to create a centralized one. We have the technology to create a decentralized one, ideally at an EU level, rather than each member state creating their own. Once you have that registry, you can even stack on not just the solutions, technical solutions, but also other regulatory related solutions like provision of renewable energy certificates or whatever we wish to support at the EU and wider market level. Now, what is frustrating when you take it to the next step is that while we show that there are clear benefits of energy communities, it's very slow to see them happen in reality, even though people are very much taking their time and resources. And here we have, two sides of the coin. We talk more about energy poverty today. When you have an energy community, then you also give a possibility for reduced energy poverty. You also give a possibility for a community to share with those in need. And at an EU level, because we are one of the most advanced markets on the global scale, a lot of discussion centers around sufficiency, not just relieving the grid, but trying to support the environmental goals. Whereas if we take this to an area which is less developed, which also includes some regions in Europe, but obviously includes other regions in the world, it's about energy access and about trying to locally produce and consume locally. So all the principles are there. There is now an EU level legislation, and what probably needs to happen now is better sharing of best practices by different member states that have taken more steps to implement this in practice. And we're supportive of that, and we're talking to not just policymakers, but also energy communities on the ground. And there is a certain sense of frustration, especially the pioneers of energy communities, that they're not allowed to do more. And we need to also simplify it for them. It needs to be as simple as any app on their phone, not requiring a very specific either engineering knowledge or legal knowledge to actually go and what do you need to do to register legally to set this up. We really need to simplify this, and I really appreciate that much of the chat is discussing this simplification. How do we simplify indeed? And at this point, I only see, best practice sharing and tools to reduce administration, to reduce the barrier for the individual. And again, not just to be able to trade, but also to simply be able to buy a renewable asset and install it.
Thank you, Anna. Christoph, do you want to make any point, and maybe more specifically to how to ensure better data access when it's not always granted? So what's your view here?
Yeah. So basically, we see a lot of progress in that field, and I really don't want to say that anybody is not or anybody is actively hindering data access. But some practical barriers may be that sometimes the APIs are not well specified, or the description is outdated, or state of the art would be machine readable API specifications, which usually is not the case. So that would be, let's say, technological facilitator. On the other hand, sometimes energy data or market data is, if it's in a machine readable way, it's behind a paywall, which is peanuts for large utilities, but it may be a barrier for smaller companies or smaller ESCOs. So that's, I can see how we can increase the access to data.
Okay, so maybe switching back to the TSOs and DSOs, Michiel and Georg. So basically, what first of all, do you see a good TSO and DSO alignment on data harmonization, use of data formats such as the SIM standard, or I think the harmonized role model is also an ongoing discussion. And basically, how do you see potentially tools like the flexibility register to ease this TSO DSO interoperability moving forwards? So
yeah, I think one of the keywords that we are looking for is indeed collaboration. I think in Belgium we have quite a good record and good experience in working together with our DSOs. So I think one of the projects that demonstrated is a bit the communication, the Flex Hub and the real-time communication platform that we have built together with the DSOs for the delivery of one of our balancing products on the DSO grid, so on the mid voltage grid. And so there we had communication requirements as we as Elia, but also there are some communications or there's some data needs on the DSO side. Instead of building two tools and that the BSP then needs to communicate to both tools, where we then did ask the same information but in another way, and that also ensures that our definitions that are the same. So if we talk about the delivery point, that also the DSO talks about the same delivery point. That is clear also for the BSP that it is one and the same. And of course, we take that into account, of course, what was being decided on European level. And indeed, part of this solution is indeed that flexibility, which is there for the moment. Indeed, is focused on mid voltage, but we also have another project that's really going down into the residential sphere. It's called the Internet of Energy project and the linked ecosystem, where indeed we are looking indeed more at the consumer-centric way and the decentralized system that will happen with residential consumers, and there how we can facilitate those energy services and work together with the whole ecosystem to come up with the necessary solution. And indeed, one of the solutions that we indeed are investigating there, I think, as Anna mentioned, is that decentralized registry, because flexibility will be delivered at points. But problem is, if you look at for the moment flexibility points that are large gas-fired plants, it's easy for us as a DSO to go and visit a gas-fired plant. It's easy, you know where it is. While if you want to do the same for all electric vehicles, you will have a person full-time busy with going to the houses and verify if that car is really a car of that model. So who then needs to give us that trust? Because we as a TSO need, of course, the trust that it's indeed a real asset. And then, of course, you need to go to the broader system of course, your asset manufacturers. They know that. So if we have a Tesla car and we say Tesla cars can participate to our balancing product, well, the best person to say that the car is real is, of course, Tesla, because they have issued the car, they've built the car, they've given it to the person, and they can say to us, or it means to us, okay, this is the information you need. And also, I think there is a large potential for also working cross-sector, because that asset registry, well, it can also be used in other sectors, because we as a TSO are interested in what maybe the capacity of your car. While maybe the government is can be more interested in to know how fast can your car drive, what's the horsepower for fiscal reasons, also the insurance companies. And the good thing with the decentralized system and with verified credentials and all those kinds of things is that you can open up only the information that a party needs. So you can, if you compare to your identity card, if you have to prove you're over 18, you show your identity card, but the person who sees it immediately sees everything. But with digital representation, you can say, well, look, you can only see that I'm above 18, that I can enter. The same, we as system operators should know which model it is, what's the capacity, but you should not know how fast you can drive with that car. That's for us not interesting. And I think there are there's a large potential. I think also within Flanders, you have there the whole ecosystem around Solid, that indeed that the end consumer can store the data and can present it to indeed service providers and share the data with them, a bit like we have now in Europe. You have the COVID certificate. It's basically the same principle. You have the government issuing you a certificate that you are vaccinated. You can use it in other countries, and there's and that works because everybody trusts, okay, the person that issued the certificate, that they are trustworthy. And that's a bit the same what we should create in the energy sector, and that I think can be reused in other sectors.
Interesting. Yeah. So thank you, Georg.
Yeah, hello. So again, we should get to a common language. I think a very good basis for this is the work of the EU Smart Grids Task Force, the implementing acts for data interoperability. They foresee strategies to exactly achieve what Michiel was raising. And as he was, I will do things bottoms up. So last thing he talked about was the flexibility resources register. I think this is a very delicate topic because we have countries in Europe that have a central connection point register. In Austria, for example, we have the management of the connection point characteristics as a DSO responsibility. So it's always the connecting system operator, connecting grid operator. And this has reasons, and it would have a lot of side effects if you change this. So we rather would call this a flexibility resources data management. And we believe that also in Europe, we have a very good conceptual basis with the active systems management report, which defines or coins the term asset pre-qualification and grid pre-qualification. So that should be a very good basis to account for countries that have implemented a more centralized approach, and also for countries that are following a more decentralized path. Both should be possible. The question was also for how do we ensure that TSOs and DSO align a bit further. I think also a very good basis here is the common information model for electricity. We should get to a common information model for energy. Of course, the SIM has its gaps. And if you look at the drafts for the Data Interoperability Acts from the EU Smart Grids Task Force that are about to come quite soon, they will also foresee how these reference models, these simplified common language, can be translated into a better common information model that can then be reused for more technical use cases and purposes. And I also want to briefly come back to what Anna and Christoph said. I think that, yes, simplicity is key, and it's very complicated these days to get to know about how do I get access to my consumption information. If I am an Austrian company and I want to provide my services to German customers, how do I find out where to get access, or what do I need to tell my clients to do to share their consumption information with me, or master data information, connection point information? This is really complicated, or complex these days, and it takes a lot of work to get from complexity to simplicity. And really, DSOs and also TSOs in Europe are doing a lot of work to improve that situation already. So we have created a project that we call EDI, a European distributed or decentralized data infrastructure for energy, where we want to link these efforts. So we're talking to data sharing infrastructures from Spain, France, Austria, a number of other countries, countries that take a centralized approach, countries that take a decentralized approach. We wanted to connect them to provide a unified European interface to energy data. Also included a concept for a way to share in-house data trustedly and integrate it into a common European interface for energy data, not by replacing existing technology, but by connecting what has already been achieved. And the goal is to make it as easy as, paying online with PayPal to share your energy data with a data-driven company. But to get to this simplicity, from the very complex situation that we have now is quite an effort.
Okay, so thank you, George. So maybe back to Veli for the regulation part. So what's your input maybe to these ideas in view of the design of the energy data space and this debate about flexibility register to facilitate TSO, DSO cooperation and coordination? Do you have any specific points?
Yeah, of course, we've been following the progress on the different central and decentral data gathering ways in different countries in that sense. So we have central data hubs, and some countries DSOs are collecting the data and sharing, and somewhere suppliers are even to do that. So that is, of course, something that is for consumer. It could be confusing who is actually the data responsibility manager, or data manager, or who's doing the work. And of course, there's a cost part of it as well. So if we have a regulated entities doing this, two different entities do it in one country or something like that, so that there's a cost of course. But I think it's the most important thing is we would have a clear rules, and we would clearly inform the consumer who's in charge of the data and how he or she will have access to its data to be able to participate in the markets as well. Of course, we've been discussing this a bit on the register side, and I think we need some sort of a aggregation of the participants or some kind of register in some sense. But that's, of course, we haven't taken into very close look on which is the way, because as we all know, there's so many different ways to do it for the moment.
Okay, so I see the hour is turning, so we are coming close to the end of the panel. So maybe I will leave each of you to say a final words on if you would like to conclude in view of what we've been discussing. So as you've seen, I've tried to mix the Q&A part and the question part of the panel. So I hope I managed to cover the key question which were raised. There were a lot of questions into the chat. So thank you to everyone for your active participation. So maybe Anna or Christoph, you want to start?
Sure, and obviously our audience has a particular interest in this topic, but I'm actually happy to see from the discussion that there is a very mature and advanced understanding that we should be able to do more because the technology is available to us. I also want to emphasize that the studies that we did are actually on real live data. And we did one with an energy community in Germany. We also most recently did one in Colombia. And in Colombia, we did it using their very limited pricing schemes, and show that even with very limited pricing schemes, there are benefits that are tangible for the grid resilience and for the individuals participating here, which is, from my personal interest, especially important since the more low-income groups actually stand a very, very important economic benefit, and to reduce the gap, the economic gap they have in the society as well. So there is that social aspect as well. One of the questions in the chat talked about, is the legislation complicated? How can we connect? Actually, it really doesn't have to be. Even within the current limitations, you can have progress and then over time add more freedom. So we are now very interested first to see what will happen in Austria as one of the first countries that very clearly allowed peer-to-peer trading. And I hope that once energy communities there start engaging outside of what were regulatory sandboxes and across the country that the other member states will follow. I'm also happy to hear that there is an agreement that we need to have this decentralized energy asset registry, so indeed that we can have more solutions available. As to the privacy discussions, I mean, really, we just have to look at any app that we use on the phone where we can set who can see what. We can do the same with our energy asset and allow different applications access to different data points. This is all possible, and therefore we just need to move faster and look at what Australia is doing and move it to Europe now. So I'll end with there, and with many thanks to the DG Energy for including us in this important debate.
Thank you, Christoph. Maybe if we can go a bit faster because we have only a few minutes left. Yeah.
Okay, we already talked about simplicity, about new ideas itself, but to some extent, discussion misses the fact that we have a naturally grown framework, which is based on TSO as a system operator, and electricity exchange is managed by TSOs between countries. And also the SIM standard was mentioned, which I agree is a very good initiative, and it's very helpful to harmonize between Europe. But it's also a very heavy data model, which is not suitable for lower level communication and for exchange of data peer-to-peer, for instance. So that's why, for instance, in the Interconnect project, we try to investigate and test alternative solutions which can also be used across different European countries.
Okay, thank you, Michel and Georg. Any final words?
Yeah, so thank you very much for having us. It was a very interesting discussion. I think for area, I think it's mainly about standardization and open access to data need behind the meter. I think that's really will be the key challenge, and to really start evolving to that consumer-centric vision or system. You really need to have standardization on data behind the meter and also open access, so that the need service providers can start delivering services to the end consumers based on the data, not only measurement data, but also, as talked about, the decentralized asset registry. Asset data is also important to create good services.
Thank you, Joe.
I just wanted to say that, with regards to data sharing, a lot has been demanded from DSOs and also TSOs in the past, and a lot has been delivered, probably a little bit below the radar. But it's very important that we now, like in many member states, and it's very important now that we get to a cross-member state interoperability to allow for players to work and compete on a European market. And for this, it's very important that we also get help probably from the public sector with the ongoing EIDAS amendment. So grid operators have a responsibility before they share the data that they reliably authenticate companies and natural persons that want to have access to that data. And for this, we need the EIDAS amendment. We need also the possibility to reliably get to a statement on representation of whether you log in as a company, whether you log in as a natural person or for another natural person. We want to go the European way. In Austria, we want to support this, but there are still some blockers. So what would really help us to get to a smooth European user experience and simple European user experience in data sharing would be a good and ambitious EIDAS amendment.
Thank you. Veli, regulator, have the final word.
Thank you for that. So to start with, of course, I think we have a very excellent discussion today, and then for new services and procedures which we need, of course, we could work on more on EU level as we've been doing already, but to encourage more data-driven services and developing the operability in that sense, and technical neutrality and protecting the consumer as well. But I think the one key element which was mentioned today was also the development of open protocols, which is something I think that could be one way to proceed as well. And of course, I think the action plan correctly highlights some of the lack of application of digital solution in the energy sector, which we all realize. So that's something that we could work on and make sure that will be enhanced. And of course, we might need more regulated incentive schemes to make sure that we will have a better way forward within this digital transition, and of course the other issues on the new services and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Veli, and thank you to all the panelists for your very direct and open response. I think I very much enjoyed the content of the discussion. And back to Mark or Michael for the conclusions. Thank you.
Mark, over to you. Mark.
Hello. My computer was a bit slow, so I heard you, but I was still waiting. Good, great. I mean, it's almost 12, and we had a very good and interesting discussion, and I will try to make a few points as conclusion, which is not an easy task because, of course, there was a lot of information and a lot of points being made. So, of course, there may be a risk that I miss out some important points, for which I apologize on forehand. I also would like to, but maybe start with the fact that for us, this was the 6th workshop of a series of workshops that we have organized. Is the last one out of this series. So thanks again for Smart N for organizing it with us. In particular, Michael, Laurent, and Marion. So really, really great, very, very useful. And I think if we put all these 6 workshops together, we really gathered a lot of information and input that will help us to be more precise, actionable, and impactful in what we want to do with the action plan. So we will do our best to absorb all this information and translate it to something operational. And that's also what I would like to do in my conclusions, to indicate of a few of the key points that we take away from it, which we also would intend to publish. So if then there are things that you think we missed, then please let us know. And of course, apart from thanking Smart N, I should thank the panelists, Anna, Michiel, Georg, Christoph, and Veli-Pekka, because it was really very, very nice to hear the different points of view and see also where the common things are appearing. So I think one key point is clearly that this area that we're discussing today, flexibility markets, and also the role that data exchange plays in it, is very much evolving. Laurent, you showed the legal discussions that are happening, the network codes that are under development. Veli-Pekka told about sandboxes. Anna, you talked about the lack of clarity because technology is there, but the regulation needs to be clearer. At the same time, some say maybe the markets are getting more complicated because of flexibility. We are going from the grid and the meter also to looking behind the meter, and I think this has been a point that has been raised consistently, and that we may not be able to integrate in the implementing act on metering, but in the next steps when we talk about data exchange, we definitely want to integrate that, and we have legal provisions like in the Buildings Directive, on the Renewable Directive, that also give us the let's say the legal backing to look what's happening behind the meter. But I'm afraid that it's not sure that the things will become very clear very fast in terms of this market will continue to evolve. So I think that is something that we cannot solve easily. But what I think we can do is, first of all, give clarity on the direction and work with, let's say, the market, the member states, the regulators, the stakeholders, so that some of the core parts of what we need to make happen and where we need clarity to make the next step, that we can move forward. And I think this is what we would try to do also with the action plan. I think, Laurent, in the beginning, you also showed on the one hand the interaction between the TSO, DSO and the platform or the aggregators, and on the other hand, between the aggregators or the market parties and the consumers. And maybe I would like to make a few points about both things. So maybe taking the TSO, DSO market interaction first, right? I think there a key work that's being done is obviously the flexibility network code that will look into the type of products, the way the interaction is supposed to happen to offer flexibility. What of course it also requires is more active and more investments from the network operators. I think in particular at the distribution level to be able to communicate at the same level as the TSO in terms of what they know about what's happening in the grid, in order to be able to steer it and in order to make use of all the flexibility that is connected. I think Elia mentioned a good example of how they have set up an interaction with DSOs. I think this is very interesting for us to look at. And I think this flexibility register was mentioned as a way of network operators knowing what is connected to the grid. I think there we have to make sure that this gets very easy. We are also launching an Horizon Europe call. I think the deadline is in October, where we try to, or where we basically want to support setting up a kind of catalog of appliances, because of course a car with a certain battery type can do the same thing wherever it is in the grid. So we don't need to, I would like to make sure that we can avoid that a network operator has to go to a house to check if the car is actually there, but that we can do this digitally. First of all, by knowing this battery is of this type, so we know what it can do. And secondly, we have a verified method to make sure that it's there without having us requiring to go and check if it's actually there, right? This can all be solved digitally, I would hope. But more importantly, this is on the one hand, you know, what can the market bring in terms of flexibility to the grid, but we also need to look at what can the grid operators bring to the market. And the increasing the amount of information that can be shared, increasing the intelligence in the grid, and a cooperative way between TSOs and DSOs to make this data available so that it's easily digestible is extremely important if we want this market to take off. So I think we need to look at, you know, both at what do we need from the market and how can we make that easy, like these flexibility register kind of things, but also how do we make it easy for the market to understand what's happening in the grid so that they can provide good offers. And I think there we also need to focus on the investments and how can we guide the investments to make that happen, that every grid in Europe is as smart as we would like it to be. And as Veli-Pekka also already mentioned, that we need to look at incentives of how to go about this. I think we're very grateful for the work that the CR is doing and Veli-Pekka is doing in looking into how can we create more incentives and how can we monitor these types of investments better. So I think that's one thing. And then if we talk about let's say the market, the aggregators, the suppliers communicating with the consumers, that's of course the other side of it, where also with the action plan in particular, I think we can add value, because that is where it is basically data exchange of many to many that we need to make easy, where we need to make sure that it becomes easy for consumers to get into these kind of markets, that it's simple, that the services are simple, that they don't need to understand everything, but that they can just trust what's happening. And on the other hand, that it becomes very easy for aggregators, energy companies, suppliers, whoever they are, service companies, to aggregate information from different sources. And I think this is an issue where with the data exchange governance that we would like to set up with the action plan, of course, this is still an idea under preparation. It needs to be validated, but this is what we're looking at in particular to see how can we create a data exchange arrangement on this side so that it becomes very easy for the market to bring its flexibility at a level of scale that matters to the grid or to the implicit or the explicit demand response markets, right? So I think this is one of the key things we're going to look into. Of course, we want to do this with as much as possible open protocols, standards that are already there. But I think the key point is first to make sure that we have the right people around the table and make sure that this is also actionable and drives forward. And I think for that, of course, this will be a big coordination exercise. So how do we make sure that this stays clear and focus on really the right questions to be answered and not on all kind of side issues? I think that will be a key challenge for us, for all of us, to make that happen. And I think that also means that we need to allow for experience, we need to allow for innovation, we need to allow for the parties that really want to move forward fast to be able to move forward fast, but make sure that there is a best practice exchange so that in the end we also establish something that works for the whole of the EU. And I think we've seen in some of the earlier workshops some best practices from different member states where they set up data exchange systems at a national level. Georg was mentioning this. These are, I think, extremely important because at the EU level, we can add a layer on top of it. We can make sure that there is interoperability between these national systems, but I don't think we can at EU level take care of, let's say, the whole EU down to the local level, right? There are national steps that need to be taken. There is a member state responsibility to organize things. And I think there also this data exchange governance can help because we can help, for example, Georg going around Europe saying what he's doing and what others can learn from it. And we have other good examples like that. We can create a very, let's say, inspiring discussion between member states where they can help each other out. And of course, if they talk to each other from the beginning, we also have a better guarantee that these things are going to be interoperable. So I think these are some of the key points we're looking at to set out with the data exchange governance. I think we mentioned before we don't want to start dealing with all type of data in any type of situation. I think there are 3 priorities we want to start with. One is flexibility markets and prosumers, decentralized assets, etc. How can we make data exchange work for that? Then a specific topic probably we want to look at is e-mobility because it brings such a big industry in the discussion that also is looking at other ways of valorizing the data. So we want to dedicate some specific time or a group to that. And then the last one is about buildings and using all this smart data that come from appliances and from buildings also to facilitate renovations. And then I think was also mentioned there are specific things for each of these use cases or priorities, but there are also things they will have in common, like AI does, like possibilities to identify yourself digitally in Europe. So we want to make sure that these things are developed for the specific use case that they need to solve to be able to focus. But we also want to make sure that they are taking the building blocks that are there that are common and make sure that we don't reinvent the wheel for every individual data exchange case, so to say. And I think what's happening now with the Metering Implementing Act is a good starting point. We will want to build on what the Smart Grid Task Force is doing and has been doing and build on the structure that is there. But this is a bit the way we see it going forward. And I think also, I think the main point from today is how can we make this discussion that we need to have as simple as possible, giving clear signals on where it's going so that the key elements can go forward and the technology that we have can be deployed. But at the same time, make sure that we keep everybody on board and build this out in the system that works in the whole of the EU. Thank you very much again for organizing this. It was very, very useful and very inspiring.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, all panelists. And indeed, we are already 11 minutes later. So we will keep discussing. And thanks a lot. And we are looking forward to indeed the cooperation with the European Commission on this digitalization in energy action plan. Very relevant. Thank you very much. Goodbye.